At finehomebuilding.com, we've taken our 40 years of experience publishing an expert-written magazine for architects, designers, builders, remodelers, and do-it-yourselfers, and used it to build the best online membership available to anyone interested in high-quality, high-performance homes. With an all-access membership, you can read 40 years of FHB print issues, watch hundreds of in-depth how-to videos, follow the annual FHB house build, plan your next project with our new project guides, and much more. Visit finehomebuilding.com to sign up for All Access, the most important tool in your toolbox.
Not a week that goes by that I don't visit my favorite home center. And they sell a lot of material, electrical material that that can be readily installed. It doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be in compliance with the code.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Mark Petersen. Today I'm joined by John Williamson, Electrical Operations Supervisor for the state of Minnesota. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Hello, John. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah. Good morning, Mark. It's good to see you again. Thank you.
Yeah. Just for our listeners, John and I have worked together. I was an editor at another magazine, and whenever we created a article about that had anything to do with electrical, because it was a DIY magazine, so we had a lot of folks who weren't crazy about us doing those type of articles in the begin with. So, but our motto, our thought line was, people are going to do it anyway, so we might as well give them the best information that we can. And whenever we did a story like that, John was our advisor, and he read all the stories very carefully. So that's how I got to know John. So,
Yep.
John, So in addition to being kind of a consultant advisor, your role at Minnesota, just explain a little bit about what you do, what your job is.
Yeah. First of all, I'm not here speaking for Minnesota today. We talked about that, but I'm just here. We're having a conversation about all the things that I love: electrical code, licensing, inspection, permits, etc. So my current role is the electrical operations supervisor. And essentially what that means is that I stepped aside a couple of years ago and handed off the title of chief electrical inspector to a co-supervisor. So he is responsible for all the field operations, and I kind of transitioned to just dealing with the office operations. And I've been there so long that they kind of rely on me to kind of hold all that tribal knowledge because, I've been there so long. But I am retiring December 7th.
Ooh, that's coming up.
My official announcement. Here we go. No turning back.
And
thank you.
I'm assuming you started as a field inspector?
Yeah. How far back do you want me to go?
We don't have to go back too far. But as your job, so you're a field inspector, and then when you started working for the state, my understanding is it was your job. So if an inspector was out in the field, so for our listeners, it works different everywhere. Minnesota is the electrical inspections are kind of mostly handled through the state, not the county or the city. There's exceptions to that, but so right. My understanding, John, is that when a field inspector had a question about code or something, they would kind of call you for clarity.
Yeah. When I started with the state in 1994, I started as we call them electrical area representatives, but essentially it's equivalent to a regional representative. And the regional representatives have a district. We have 11 districts around the state. And each district has, anywhere from 7 to maybe 11 contract electrical inspectors. So when I started with the state, that's what I was doing. Previous to that, I was an electrical inspector for a private inspection company. We had contracts with several St. Paul suburbs to do their building inspections, plumbing, electrical, the whole gamut. So yeah, I started out overseeing contract electrical inspectors. They're independent contractors. Technically, we don't supervise them. And about a year in the field, or after a year in the field, I had the opportunity to go to work in the office as the assistant executive secretary. At the time, we had we were still a standalone state agency, the Minnesota Board of Electricity, and we had my boss was the executive secretary. I became the assistant executive secretary, and that all was precipitated by retirements. And so eventually, my boss retired. I became chief electrical inspector, and here we are. So
our audience wants to know what's going on with the code. So most of this conversation is going to have to do with kind of how the code came about, just kind of a big picture, and then talk about, you sent me a list of some current changes, or some, I'm not sure if they're current changes, if they're upcoming changes. We'll get to that in a second. But let's talk about the NEC National Electrical Code. I think that's what that stands for, right?
mm-hmm. Yep.
How does that process work? When did it come about? How does it work? And have you actually ever been involved in the process yourself?
I have been invited in the past years to be a code panel member, but due to my commitments, running the statewide program, it just wasn't going to work out. But I've always participated just as an electrician or as an inspector, submitting proposals, submitting comments, and keeping kind of a thumb on the pulse of the code as it was developed. So, the National Electrical Code was first published in 1897. So it's been around a long time. You think back to the late 1800s and the advent of electricity, and initially it was street lighting, and they were wiring up industrial buildings with just open cables on insulators, open switchboards. I mean, it probably looked like Frankenstein's laboratory back in the day, And
I don't even think back then. I don't know. I think there was still the war going on, the DC-AC war back
then. Yeah. Yep. There's a good movie out there relative to that. When AC finally won the war of currents, as it was called, but you had minimal standards. There were no standards, and so the insurance company, they're like, we got to stop losing all these properties,
and people
think about. Yeah. I mean, basically, they would tap onto these conductors, drop them down to some more sort of machine or a motor. We had grain elevators blowing up. It was not a good situation. And so anyway, the insurance companies and the electrical industry, what existed at that time, everybody came together and said, you know what, we need a code. We need a nationwide code. So that's how the National Electrical Code was developed. So it was kind of a joint effort between insurance, electrical, architectural interests, engineering, allied organizations, material suppliers. So here we are today.
So who sits on the board nowadays? Is it electricians? Are there insurance companies and engineers on the board? What makes up the board right now?
You mean for the National Electrical Code?
Yeah. Who's making the decisions today?
Yeah. The National Fire Protection Association, they kind of shepherd the development of the National Electrical Code, along with almost, I don't know, I think they have 300 standards and recommended practices in their portfolio. And so the NFPA they kind of guide the process, but they don't write the code. And that's important for people to know, I think, is, some people think that these codes are, they're created in a smoke-filled back room someplace, and nobody has any input. And it's like, no, it's a public, open consensus process. Yeah, you got to kind of know how it works to participate, but it's not that difficult. And so the National Electrical Code is overseen by NFPA. There are approximately 20 code-making panels. There's, I don't know, sometimes 20 people on each panel. There are hundreds of people involved representing in no particular order of importance, but insurance companies, testing laboratories like UL and ETL. You got manufacturers, you got labor organizations, contracting organizations, inspectors, the general public.
So the general public so I could write in and say, hey, this code is ridiculous, or hey, we need this code really bad, and somebody's going to look at it and take it,
Yep. And every opportunity we get, we encourage people to do that. There's kind of a little joke when somebody is complaining to an inspector about one thing or another in the code.
What? People don't complain to inspectors? Never.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we say is we look forward to your proposal during the next code cycle.
Right. In the future. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the codes we have, which, I mean, that makes sense. We have all the interested parties kind of coming up with these codes. And is code the law? And my understanding is that, the state of Minnesota, if the NEC comes out with this particular thing, the state of Minnesota can say, yep, we agree with this one. Nope, we don't agree with this one. Can you do that? Is that a legit thing?
Yes, we in Minnesota. Let me back up just a moment. We're under the 2020 code right now, and some states are still on the 2017. Some states are still on the 2014, 2011. It takes a while for the code to get adopted. In fact, our target date was to get the code adopted. It's always our target date, July 1st. So if we're talking 2020 NEC, we want to have it adopted by July 1st of that year. The 2023 code, we'll have it adopted by July 1. That didn't happen in 2020. There was a delay. And
let me guess, COVID?
What's that?
Let me guess, it had something to do with COVID?
Yeah. COVID was a factor. And I'll be honest with you, the home builders actually were in opposition to some of the changes in the 2020 code. And so that forced us to have a public hearing, which is fine. Administrative law judge got involved. Anyway, what we do in Minnesota we have people that are on those code making panels. So we work during that 3-year cycle prior to the development of the code, the 2023. So as soon as the 2020 was published, the door was open for people to start submitting public inputs for the 2023 NEC. That's how we operate. So we work in that process to develop the new code. In Minnesota, we adopt the NEC without any amendments. Now, other states and jurisdictions around the country, they take a different approach. They let the code process. It's not that they don't participate during that 3-year cycle, but if something comes about in the code that just creates them heartburn, they will amend that out of the code when they adopt at the local or state level. But we're so confident in the process, the open consensus process. It has been run through the ringer, and so when that code is published and we're about to adopt it, it's like, what argument, knowing that hundreds of people have participated in the process and it's been vetted thoroughly for 3 years, what technical substantiation could you possibly put forward that would counteract or contradict what all the experts have already agreed on? So anyway, we adopt it without amendments.
And I can see that makes sense, because I would imagine, so like the building code, there's probably more amendments or rejections, which kind of makes sense because the building practices in northern Minnesota probably don't apply in every case into a southern New Mexico scenario.
Right. Good.
So there's probably just certain things. Yeah. But electrical is electrical. I mean, it's
exactly.
It is the same. Yeah, it is the same in northern Minnesota as it is in southern New Mexico.
That's actually one of my that's one of my bullet points, is that electricity behaves the same across the entire country, across North America, and around the world.
Right.
The NEC is not a model code per se. It's just an installation standard, an electrical installation standard. When you look at a building code, a model building code, it has prescriptive and performance-based provisions for putting up a building that's going to be there forever. But it also has administrative provisions for licensing and permits and inspections and inspection fees. None of that is in the NEC. NEC is just a how-to guide for how to wire something safely. So,
Yeah, that's a different way of looking at it, I guess. So, well, I think we should jump right into. So you sent me a list of. Were these actual changes in the 21 that you sent me this list, or are these proposed changes for 23?
the list that I sent you were changes that came about in the 2020 NEC and are now in effect wherever the
For 2020. So
for,
does it happen? Does it happen
for
every 20 years, or every 2 years, or 3 years? Is it
3 years? Yep. So, yep.
So these are in there. So if I picked up the new book, this would be in there. These would be in there.
Yeah. If a jurisdiction has adopted the 2020 code without amending these items that we're going to talk about, they would be applicable in that jurisdiction. Yep.
And when we're going to run through, I don't know, there's half a dozen or maybe a little more. I'd be curious to know when we run through these, and maybe it's all of them, but I'd be curious to know what the home builders in Minnesota, which ones they really, ruffled their feathers. So,
sure.
And it's probably all of them. But we'll get the first one I have is it's a 230.67 surge protection, and I'm just kind of there's a section in somewhere in the code where it's kind of it gives you a change at a glance. So this is a really general summary. This is I think this is. That change at a glance, actually, is that in the book where it kind of starts out the change? Or
yeah, I'm going to throw a plug in here. The National Electrical Code obviously is a technical document, and there are educators across the country and inspector organizations across the country that distill the changes in the code, kind of put them into easy reader format for the rest of us. and the International Association of Electrical Inspectors, they prepare every 3 years. They prepare an analysis of code changes, and that is the source of my material, because that's the book that we study to help us learn the code, and that's the book that is used by electricians and electrical contractors to help understand not only, okay, the 2017 code said this is what the 2020 says, or it might be such a contentious issue that the technical writers at the IAEI, they might have to go back and it's like, okay, remember, this is the way it was in 2008, and this is what happened in 2014. So it's good to have that background, especially when you think about the turnover in the trade and you got new people coming on board. It helps them understand what this was all about, and why do we get here? Why do we get to this point in the 2020s? So
the language that I'm reading is not probably verbatim as what you're going to see in the NEC.
Right.
It's kind of a distilled in layman's terms, basically. I mean, the numbers will be the same, but
right. Yep. Yeah. The NEC is a copyrighted book. So yeah, you have to be careful. If you're instructing or teaching, unless you have permission from NFPA, you shouldn't be using the actual copyrighted code text. So
sure, and it is kind of amazing. On a side note, both the Builders Code and the NEC, in today's world of internet, where they do an unbelievably good job at protecting that information.
Yeah.
You can't just go and say, "Hey, what's this code?" and find it you won't find it on the internet. And if you do, I'm assuming that. Go ahead.
Actually, sorry if I keep interrupting you.
No,
There,
no.
I'm not. Don't quote me. I'm not an attorney, but apparently there's a legal argument. I don't know if there's a law, but there's a legal argument out there that if a government entity adopts a code, they have to provide copies of it to the public. It's no different than reading the Constitution, I suppose. So on the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry website, if you go there and you look for the 2020 family of building codes, of which the electrical code is just one member of the family, you will find links to the International Code Council website, and you can view for free every code that Minnesota has adopted.
Wow. Apparently,
And
just Minnesota though, not the national. So it's just the Minnesota. But I suppose that is the national because we don't change anything in Minnesota.
We don't have any homegrown codes anymore. Even our plumbing code, our plumbing board finally got to the point where instead of writing a homegrown code, they just adopted the International Plumbing Code. So the codes, including the National Electrical Code, there's actually you can go to NFPA's website and you can view the NEC for free. You are just restricted. You can't copy and paste. You can't print it and that sort of thing. So these code development organizations, they rely on that revenue stream from selling their copyrighted material, but they have to provide it for free for viewing online. So it's kind of a balancing act. But at the end of the day,
I can see both sides of the issue. I mean, the one side, it does take. I mean, these people who are volunteering in these boards or whatever the process to go through. I mean, that takes time and money.
Yeah.
So I mean, it makes sense that they should, somehow. I mean, nobody's going to do it I mean, not that they're probably volunteers. I'm not sure if they get paid or not, but it takes money to get this process done. However, having it not being available to the general public, I could see that being an argument as well. I mean, people,
right.
There's a lot of DIYers out there or smaller contractors who perhaps maybe shouldn't be doing it, but if they are doing it, it probably makes sense that they know how to do it or what the right way to do it is. So I guess I didn't. Is this something new? This, or has it always been that way?
No, I want to say that viewing adopted codes for free online, it's probably been around for probably 3 code cycles. So I'm guessing, 12 years or so. It's that's been available at least. Yeah.
Yep. Interesting. All right, well, let's jump in to the codes.
Yeah.
First I kind of just arranged the ones that I thought that seemed a little more interesting to me and maybe to our audience. 230.67 covers surge protection. It says new requirement added to require surge protection on all services at dwelling units. So I read that as every time you have so if it's a new construction or a bigger remodel, when you hook up the service panel, you're going to need that whole panel surge protected. Am I reading that right?
Yeah. I think the genesis for this was all of the property damage that has. I'll take a quick step back. If you have an idea for the electrical code and you want to submit it as a public input, previously they were called proposals. I'm kind of old school that way, so I might slip up and say proposal. But if you have an idea for a proposal and you submit it, you provide some technical substantiation or safety substantiation. It may have traction, it may not, but there was enough traction on this topic that the code making panels and just about everybody agreed that the code making panels and just surge protection, the surge protection on our little power strips on our desk and behind our entertainment center, those are great, but they're way down the line. If there's a lightning strike on your home or on your neighbor's home or on a tree in your backyard, that surge of electricity will find its way into your home. And if it's going to follow the wiring to the power strip on your, protecting your computer, it might be too late, or that power strip might not be able to squelch that surge of electricity. And in the process, you just lost $1,000 TV, and your smoke
Right.
alarms are
Any idea?
destroyed.
Yeah.
So
Any idea how much this, an average on a typical suburban home, how much a whole house surge protection system would cost?
I installed one. When this came, of course, as being part of the process, or part of the co-development process, 3 years ago, I saw this as a proposal, and I thought, you know what? I've been thinking about doing this. I went to the home center for $95. I bought a whole house surge suppressor, uh, brand name that you would recognize. Took me 10 minutes to install it on my panel, and it's got a little green light on it that tells me that it's active. There's no moving parts, and it's just kind of a silent guard. It's just there all the time. If that green light ever goes out, that tells me that it took a hit uh, that exceeded its rating, and I need to replace it. But other than that, it's just kind of a silent sentry just sitting there doing its job. We had some bad storms that came through the Twin Cities last summer, not this summer, but a year ago. And I was talking to one homeowner. They had $10,000 in lost appliances. It wiped out the microwave, wiped out the refrigerator, all of the modern appliances that are Wi-Fi connected. Boom, they're all gone.
And if I had to guess, at least a few of the proposals came from insurance companies.
Maybe
how much?
Not sure.
How much did you pay for that?
What's that?
Do you recall what you paid for that?
Yeah, it was like $95 at the home center.
So about $100 plus, plus to have an electrician.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you hired a contractor to come out and install that for you, they'd probably charge you an hour's worth of labor.
Mm-hmm.
But well worth it. Well worth it.
It'd be interesting. It would be interesting if you talk to, and I don't know if this is the case, but it seems like it might be, if you talk to your insurance company and say, hey, I have a whole house. I installed one of these things. They might give you a break on your rates.
Possibly. Yeah. Yeah. So real quickly, just to kind of tie that one up, surge protective devices, SPD is the acronym we use in the code. It's required to be either type 1 or type 2. Type 1 are installed on the line side of the main breaker. And that could even be nippled in or connected to a meter socket on the outside of the house. We don't see too many of those. The type 2 are installed typically at the panel, and they're going to be connected to a branch circuit breaker. So in my case, I had a 2-pole 15 amp spare circuit breaker on my panel, and I just connected that type 2 surge suppressor to that. Some surge suppressors are dual function; they're type 1 and type 2. But that's how those work. Type 3 surge suppressors are the ones that you see on your desktop, and type 4 are usually built into some sort of appliance or something. What's interesting about the surge suppressive devices, surge protective devices, so they are required for 1 family, 2 family, and multifamily services. And it's a rare case in the code where if you replace your panel, say you're going to replace an old 60 amp panel with a nice big 200 amp panel, it's one place in the code where we have a retroactive provision. Generally speaking, the code is not retroactive, but in the case of SPDs, if you replace that service panel, you need to add an SPD to that panel.
It wouldn't surprise me if the manufacturers just started kind of adding that right into panels.
I would imagine the panel manufacturers, instead of a little, cube that's nippled into the side of the panel, eventually it's just going to be standard equipment. It'll be built right in.
I would think so.
Yep.
And that'll probably lower the price, and you obviously wouldn't have to, pay the electrician to do that. So
yeah, exactly.
I'm sure they have it in the works. All right, number 2, 210.11, branch circuits required, dwelling units, garage branch circuits. At least one 120 volt, 20 amp branch circuit shall be installed to supply receptacle outlets required by 210.52 in dwelling unit garages. Exception permits supply of readily available outdoor receptacle outlets. You know what? You're going to have to explain that one. I saw the images of this one, and now I don't remember what exactly.
Yeah.
So, what is this one all about?
So I don't remember the exact timing or the history of this as far as what cycle or code cycle, but bottom line is today, if you have if you have an attached garage, it's going to be wired with electricity. Detached garages to this day are not required to have electricity. If you run electricity to them, then you got to wire them to the code. So today you need 2 circuits in a garage, because you need a dedicated 20 amp circuit just for the receptacle outlets in that garage. And what was happening, and we're going to see this a couple of times in today's discussion, the electrical inspectors and contractors, it was not clear to them. Electrical, and you have to have that 20 amp circuit for the required receptacle outlet in the garage. And the required receptacle outlet in that garage is you have to have a receptacle outlet for each bay. So a typical 2-car garage, you're going to have the receptacle outlet for each car. And part of that was with the advent of being able to plug in a electric vehicle, charge it overnight.
And most builders do give you the minimum. If you have 2 bays, you get 2, and that's it.
But if you add additional receptacles in the garage, the code wasn't clear that. So some inspectors are saying, okay, you're adding a 15 amp circuit for your table saw. That doesn't comply. It needs to be on that 20 amp circuit. So anyway, the clarification in the code is simply that the circuit that is required is only required to supply the required receptacles and no other outlets on that circuit. But you can put in additional circuits if you want. And
so as long as you have the minimum 20 amp circuits or 20 amp outlets receptacles available,
exactly,
you can add an additional 15 if you want. Oh,
and
interesting.
And we have that situation in garages. We have it in kitchens because 20 amp circuits are common in a kitchen. Well, if you want your refrigerator to be on a dedicated 15 amp circuit, you can do that.
Sure.
Bathrooms, if you want to add a space heater in your bathroom, okay, you got to have a 20 amp. The receptacle outlets in the kitchen or in the bathroom need to be on a 20 amp circuit, dedicated 20 amp circuit. No other outlets. You can't have the lighting outlet on there. You can't put the fan on there. But if you, for whatever reason, you live in a log cabin, you need a space heater in your bathroom, if you want to put a 15 amp circuit in there over and above what the code requires, go for it.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
Yep.
Next one is 210.52. And that actually seems like, going back to that seems like a reasonable compromise. So
yep.
I think most people think that changes to the code are always going to make things worse or more difficult, but that apparently is not. I mean, that's not the case.
Right. Yep.
So, all right, this one, 210.52, dwelling unit receptacle outlets, balconies, decks, and porches. The required receptacle outlet for balconies, decks, and porches is also required at decks that are installed in a freestanding manner where connections to the actual dwelling is not made at any point.
Right.
So what is this all about?
Well, this is just another slight revision in the code because the code for a long time has always required a receptacle, an outdoor receptacle, accessible from grade for outdoor decks and balconies and whatnot. And it had to be below 6.5 feet, I think it is. But it talked in the code, it was talking about attached decks, attached balconies. And what has come about, apparently, and I guess I don't have a deck, but this makes perfect sense to me when I think about it. If your deck is not physically attached to the home and there's a 4-inch gap or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and apparently that correlates with something in the building code, then somebody could argue, well, I don't need that receptacle anymore because the deck technically is not attached to the home. Well, there's might be good reasons for not attaching that deck to the home. Maybe you've got stucco siding. Maybe however your home was built, it's just cumbersome to cut in a ledger and the flashing and all the things you're going to need to do to attach a deck. And if you build a freestanding deck and it's within 4 inches from your home, from an electrical perspective, you still need that receptacle outlet there for safety. The whole
So
idea
that's
is that,
the new rule. You do need it. And so, yeah, what
yeah,
is this? I'm sorry, I interrupted. What is this? What is the safety aspect? Why is that important?
well, the whole idea going way back, you have to have a convenience outlet on the front and back of every home, basically. And the whole idea was that it would, prevent people. If you had an outdoor outlet that was convenient, GFCI protected, within below 6.5 feet and accessible from grade, people aren't going to be tempted to plug into the dining room and run it out the window, or
Yep.
plug
No,
in and run it out
that makes
the
total sense. Sure.
patio door.
And I know the reason in Minnesota, when I was a builder in Minnesota for several years, and the reason people wanted to do, in my experience, the reason that people wanted to do decks like that, the main reason was they didn't need permits. If it was so far off the ground, if it was only a few feet off the ground, you weren't required to get a permit if it wasn't attached to your house. So
Yep.
that only, and people don't want to get permits for a lot of reasons, but some are legit and some are not. But that was kind of the main driving force of why the ones that I've seen that weren't connected, there was no rules about footings, there was no rules about spans, and any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So my one question on this one is the outlet can it be still attached to the house, or does it have to be on the structure? Do you have to run conduit, underground cable?
No. It would still be on the home. Sure, it'd be on the
Okay.
exterior wall of the home. Yep.
And is it 4 inches the rule? I mean, what if you have a patio that's 5 feet away from the house that I'm building is going to have a little gazebo, and it's actually going to be about 5-6 feet away from the house.
Yeah. What I'm paraphrasing here, but it says you need at least one receptacle outlet for balconies, decks, and porches that are constructed within 4 inches horizontally of the dwelling unit.
Okay.
So if you were beyond that 4-inch range, then you don't require it. It's not required. So,
Gotcha. So, I'm going to put one out there anyway, but that's interesting. All right, next one, 230.85, emergency disconnects. New requirement added to require an emergency disconnect at readily accessible outdoor locations for dwelling units. What's going on there?
This is in the 2020 process, going back 3 years, I guess. I actually submitted a comment when this was proposed. There were 2 proposals that were floated for the 2020 code.
So it's your
fault. Yeah, I lost the battle, and now we're stuck with it. No, I shouldn't say that. So there was 2 proposals for the 2020 code. One was to mandate an emergency disconnect for single or dwelling units, and a similar proposal was to mandate an emergency disconnect for all buildings, every building. Doesn't matter what type of occupancy it is. And so I wrote a comment, kind of pushing back against this idea. Well, the code has always allowed you to have your service disconnect outside. That's been forever.
So when you say disconnect, are you talking about the deal at the meter that you can pull out right at the meter, or what are we talking about when we're saying disconnect?
Well, a true disconnecting means is going to be a switch or a circuit breaker that breaks the line conductors and turns off the power. A lot of meter sockets nowadays have what's called a bypass lever, where a utility lineman can come out, they can remove the cover on the meter socket, they can reach in, they can actuate the bypass lever, and then they can pull out the meter and so they can service the meter or replace the meter, and you could be inside working on your computer, and you're not going to see any blip in the lights or anything. But that's utility work. That bypass lever is not a disconnecting means; it's a bypass. So, in fact, one of the I'm going to get to the I'll come back to that in a minute. So, um, I submitted a comment kind of pushing back against this because I felt it should be optional. You're from Minnesota. If you know very well, if you drive through a typical suburban neighborhood, everybody's got underground supply. The only thing on the outside of that house is a 200 or 400 amp meter socket. You don't have a disconnect means. The service disconnect is in the garage or it's in the basement. But the argument in the proposal was, okay, how's a first responder supposed to get to that disconnect in the garage? How's that first responder supposed to get in the basement when the attic is on fire?
And so just so for clarity, I'm sorry, just for clarity purposes, when you say disconnect, so we're talking a main. You're talking the main circuit breaker in your panel. That's what we're referring to. So they want one on the outside, so a fireman can come in, flip a switch, and run inside without having it spray water and not get worried about getting electrocuted.
Exactly. So it was a contentious issue. It went back and forth. It was deliberated for a long period of time. And I finally came to recognize and appreciate the need for it. And it's if you have a emergency generator at your home, it has to have an outdoor disconnect. If you have standby batteries at your home, there has to be an outdoor disconnect. If you have solar PV system on your roof, there has to be an outdoor disconnect. So actually, the requiring this outdoor emergency disconnect just correlates with everything else in the code. And so it makes sense. I was concerned about, I know exterior disconnects, and actually, you go through the southern United States, it's very common that the entire electrical panel is actually outdoors. And there's a lot of commercial construction nowadays. Cookie cutter type chain restaurants and different things. Very common. You might drive past the outdoor switchgear or the switchboard as you're placing your order for your burgers and fries. And it's just all outdoor rated equipment. That saves on the footprint of the building. That frees up the inside of the building for other stuff, storage and whatnot. Let's put the electrical equipment outside. So you're seeing all sorts of things. So you've got three options. You can put your service disconnect outside, and that qualifies not only as your service disconnect, but the emergency disconnect. And your panel can still be on the inside. You can put the disconnect and your panel outside in one enclosure, which was what we see in the southern part of the states. My concern with that is moisture infiltration, rodent damage, rodents. all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can have a dedicated emergency disconnect on the outside of the home, and just have your panel and main breaker on the inside. So there's different options.
How does it stop? What is so? I'm picturing the rotten neighbor kid coming over and flipping your switch off in the middle of the night. So how does that? I'm assuming it's either going to be a slight lock that a first responder would have to cut. And the other thing I think of, how are they going to know? Is there going to be a standard place where they have to put these so the first responders know where to look for them? I mean, if it's dark outside, they could spend 2 hours looking for the darn thing.
Yeah, it has to be in a readily accessible location, meaning that you have to be able to walk right up to it. It can't be buried behind a tool shed or behind a locked fence. It has to be where a first responder could essentially drive up, walk up to the house, scope it out, and okay, the electrical service is over here. I'm going to find emergency disconnect there. Regarding the vandalism, that was one of my concerns too. I don't want equipment on the outside of my house. That's an open invitation for somebody to mess with it.
Yeah.
And so if you have an enclosure, you got a meter enclosure now that is a little bit larger, and it's got a disconnect switch in it, or typically it's just going to be a circuit breaker, you can actually lock that breaker in the on position. And then when you close the cover, you can throw a second padlock on there. And it's like, well, that defeats the purpose of the first
Right.
responders ready access. And I had a fireman tell me, guess what? We got bolt cutters on every truck.
Sure.
He says, that's not
Yep.
going to slow us down. And it's like, okay,
And
point
if they
taken.
are, I mean, are they all going to be where? I mean, if they're all where the meter is, that's great. But I'm thinking, they're just installing it somewhere away. So basically, they're going to, if there will be a meter. They're going to be at the meter. That's where they're going to be located.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be at
Gotcha.
the meter.
That makes.
Yep.
Okay. Of course, the neighbor kids probably have bolt cutters too, but. All right, I'm sure this one, people are going to love this one. 406.12, tamper-resistant receptacles. And this will probably have to be our last one, which is great. If we get good responses from our audience, I would love to have you back again because we could do this.
I could do
several shows on this.
I could do this every week.
So this one, tamper-resistant receptacles. Requirement for tamper-resistant receptacles were expanded to attached and detached garages, accessory buildings of dwelling units, common areas of multifamily dwelling units, and hotels and motels. So it sounds like basically, if there's a receptacle, it needs to be tamper resistant. Am I reading that wrong?
Yes. The requirement for tamper resistant receptacles has just like, believe it or not, this is the 50th anniversary of GFCI protection. GFCI protection first came in the code in 1971. Even though people still have heartburn over AFCI protection, that's been around since 2002. It was in the 1999 code with an effective date of 2002 for bedrooms only, but slowly, it's been incremental, expanding through the home.
In defense of the builders, because we were, I was in the business then, and there was a lot of nuisance trips with those first. I think the code caught the manufacturers not unawares, but it might have been a little, not premature, but it just seems like the AFCIs now that we're putting in the panels are much, much better.
Yes.
And more reliable than if those first ones were.
Yep. So tamper-resistant receptacles is the same thing. It's been incremental over time. Dwelling units, child care facilities, guest rooms, guest suites and hotels, motels, preschools, doctor business offices, basically places of assembly. If you've got locations where there are small children that might be unattended, it's an opportunity for them to play with a receptacle outlet. So it just makes sense. What was not clear in the code was whether or not you had to have tamper-resistant receptacles in detached garages and accessory buildings, storage sheds, machine shops. So that's been clarified in the code. It's not a new, you could call it new, but it's really mainly a clarification or a revision in the code just to eliminate that ambiguity that, okay, do I need them in the garage? Well, yeah, you do. So
all right. So just again, for clarity, maybe it's easier to talk about these. Where don't you need? What kind of receptacle? Where would a receptacle in a new house be that doesn't need a TR?
I can't think of any place.
Yeah.
Other than we're talking 15 and 20 amp duplex receptacles.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an older home and you've got the old 2-prong outlets, there's provisions in the code that say, okay, if you replace that 2-prong outlet, make it better, make it GFCI protected or replace it with a grounding type receptacle. But if you run down the list and none of those options are available, the last thing on the list is, okay, just replace the 2-prong outlet with another 2-prong outlet. They don't make 2-prong outlets that are tamper resistant. It's just, they just don't make them. So, but other than that,
So, and it's funny that for every 10 outlets that the home centers sell, it seems like one of them are tamper resistant. So it's just odd that I always see those piles of not tamper, and I'm just wondering, I don't even know where you could put one of those anymore.
Yeah.
So, but
I mean, I there's not a week that goes by that I don't visit my favorite home center. And they sell a lot of material, electrical material that that can be readily installed, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be in compliance with the code.
No.
So
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, John, this was a blast, and I've got a bunch more, and hopefully we can do this again soon. Congratulations on your upcoming retirement. I'm assuming you're going to still act as a consultant in your retirement. It's not a true retirement.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm
great.
I'm just retiring from my day job, and so this is my passion. So I will be engaged in the industry and all the associations I belong to. I'm just looking for the opportunity to, have more playtime, and still
aren't we all?
Yeah.
One thing before we leave, and if you don't have it now, we'll put it in the show notes. But I know there's some people going to be interested in wanting to get involved in that process and leave a comment or a suggestion to the to the panels that govern the NEC. Do you know offhand how they would? Is there a link that they can go to? If not, I'll put it in the show notes. I'll get it from you afterwards.
Yeah. I'll just send me an email or whatever, and I'll provide that link. Yeah.
Excellent.
I'll tell you real quick, the opportunity to submit proposals for the 2023 code have already come and gone. In fact, the code panels are actually meeting right now. My coworker is on one of the code panels, and he has meetings this week. They're actually in the process of vetting the proposals for the 2023 code, but the comment period will be open. Once they publish a first draft of the NEC, then there'll be a comment open. So it's not too late to participate in the 2023 process.
Excellent.
The proposals deadline's come and gone, but there's still lots of opportunity. In Minnesota, we'll start the process of adopting the 2023 code actually in January of this coming year, but it's an 18-month process. So even with that, there's lots of opportunity for people to participate.
Okay, great. We'll put the link in the show notes. And thanks again, John. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today, John. John, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you all for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, and review us wherever you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody, and thanks again for listening.